You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 71. This podcast is dedicated to CIRCUS. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey, friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. I want to give a shout out this week. I just went on the Apple Podcast preview page for this podcast. I never go on it, but I was just informed that my podcast has turned 2 years old. One of my Instagram followers wrote me and was like, hey, do you know that you've been doing this for 2 years? And I was like, no, I feel like I've been doing this for 100 billion years. So I went on the Apple Podcast just to look at it. And I want to give a shout out to Rachel Tatum, who reviewed this podcast and said it's an amazing resource for the circus community. I'm only a few episodes deep, but I can already tell I will have a deep love affair with this podcast. I recently turned circus from a hobby into a profession, so I'm always looking for more resources about the industry outside of my training space. It's extremely valuable to have an outlet like this that lets me hear thoughtful discussion on a wide range of topics, all related to this passion of mine. Also, being from LA, I can usually finish an episode on a drive in the car, which makes the traffic problem in this city way more manageable. Thank you, Shannon and guests, for sharing your info with this community. And thank you, Rachel, for leaving a review. If you want to support the podcast, you can subscribe, rate, and leave a review so other people know how awesome you think I am. It's such an odd way to say it. No, I'm going to leave it in. I'm happy with it. Another way to support the podcast is to go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. Patreon is a website that allows Patreons, or patrons apparently, to give small amounts of money each month to the podcasts or other artists that they support and love. I'm on there, and this podcast is totally funded by Patreons. So if you like what you're listening to, you want me to keep bringing it to you every single week, patreon.com/theartistathlete. Sign up today. My guest today is Jo Kreiter. Jo is a San Francisco-based choreographer and sight artist with a background in political science. Through dance, she engages imagination, physical innovation, and the political conflicts we live within. She founded the aerial dance company Flyaway Productions in 1996. Flyaway is an apparatus-based dance company that explores the range and power of female physicality. Flyaway creates dances on both architectural and fabricated steel objects, with dancers suspended anywhere from 2 to 100 feet in the air. The company uses the artistry of spinning, flying, and exquisite suspension to engage political issues and articulate the experiences of unseen women. The company creates a sense of spectacle to make a lasting impression with an audience, striving for the right balance of awe, provocation, and daring. Kreiter's tools include community collaboration, a masterful use of place, an intersectional feminist lens, and a body-based push against the constraints of gravity. I really wanted to have her on the show because I haven't had an aerial dance artist on in a while. And as you'll hear in the interview, this is kind of a departure from a traditional circus lens. But I think Jo is an awesome representation of the power of art as a tool for activism. Here's my interview with Jo Kreiter. Jo Kreiter, welcome to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
I am honored to have you. I found you because my mother sometimes, she doesn't really know what aerial is. So whenever she sees something, she's a religious New York Times reader, though. So whenever she sees anything aerial or circus related, she like cuts it out and is like, Shannon, I saw this. And usually it's something where I'm like, I know, Mom, like Ringling Brothers is in town or the Seven Fingers is doing this thing. But she clipped out your article or an article about you in the weight room. And I saw it and I was like, I have to talk to this woman.
Well, I just have to share that my mother does the exact same thing.
Does she really?
Oh, yeah. She clips things out from the Washington Post and sends them to me. It's very fun.
Oh my God, I love that. Yeah. It's like the little way of showing they care, I guess. It's sweet.
Well, the contemporary version of that is I have a 15-year-old, so I'm constantly sending him YouTube clips of things he's interested in.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Can you start by kind of explaining in your own words who you are and what you do?
I am a choreographer and sight artist. I identify far more as a dance artist than a circus artist, though I am circus trained. Mm-hmm. I was able to train for several years with Master Liu Yi at the San Francisco Circus Center in Chinese pole acrobatics. And it was many years ago. It was at a time when there were very few women doing pole. It was long before the pole, sort of popular stripper pole as exercise explosion. So it was a very unique time, and I was very lucky that he was willing to take me on as a student. Louis put me through several tests before he was willing to take a woman on to train in pole. And so we developed a really beautiful relationship. He really loves artists. It was a long-term relationship that I value a whole lot. Though, as I said, it's not my primary identity or training. I grew up as a gymnast and started dancing when I was in my last year of college, and moved to San Francisco shortly after that and met up with Terry Sengraff and Joanna Highgood, who were what I would call the grand dames of aerial dance here in the Bay Area. And they were both extremely influential on me. I danced in Joanna Highgood's company for 13 years, and within that time period started my own company.
And that's Zacco Dance Theater, right?
Yeah, Zacco Dance Theater.
Yeah.
So with Joanna as a mentor, I started my own company, and it's now been 24 years that I've been directing via Flyaway Productions. And Flyaway is an organization that works very much in collaboration and in coalition. We develop partnerships with organizations, individuals, historians, journalists, community-based nonprofits who are connected to an issue that we are interested in or affected by. And I bring artists and activists together to develop artistic work.
I guess there is an interesting kind of intersection of aerial dance and circus. I consider the two a lot more closely related, I think, than a lot of people do. But can you kind of explain what aerial dance and your medium means to you or how you define it?
Well, I think aerial dance is an evolving form, and it has multiple definitions in the same way that something like modern dance or contemporary dance does. So if you ask me, or if you ask someone who's a generation younger than me, or even a generation younger than that, you're going to get some really different answers. I'd say, to me, one of the signatures of aerial dance is the incorporation of the ground into the stage. So whereas I think of circus arts as being pretty freed from the ground, aerial dance uses the ground. In my experience, aerial dance focuses a lot on single point apparatus. That's not a necessity. That's just what's developed culturally, especially in the Bay Area, which is what I know best. I would also say that the aesthetics of the concert stage are, very equally married into the aesthetics of spectacle in aerial dance. And I think that that's not quite true in traditional circus, though, of course, contemporary circus has, shaken everything up and changed everything. And that's very delightful to me as well.
Why, when you decided to branch off from Zacco and start your own dance company, did you choose to continue with aerial dance rather than a more... I'm just thinking because aerial dance does have so many, I don't want to say constraints, but considerations, right? You have to find places to rig. You have to have all of
I'll take
different elements.
Constraints is very accurate.
Okay.
It's a really, really hard form to manage, to direct, to develop, to have a business model for. It's really challenging. I don't make a lot of work. I make one big work once a year. It doesn't get performed, over and over and over because the technical requirements are so high. But for me, I grew up as a gymnast, so being in the air is like breathing for me. And that's still true, even in my 50s. Like my day is just not complete unless I have some time in the air. But at the same time, one of the things I love about dance is that it's an adult form. And I say that coming as a childhood gymnast, where there really is no content to what's happening. You're competing for a score and it's all about form and pushing the envelope. But with dance, there is content. There is something to say, there is nuance, there is expression, there is the body surviving things. And that's something that I didn't want to give up as I was venturing into my own work.
And what is the process for you of taking form and adding content? Does the content come first and then the form?
Yeah, I think at this point my process is pretty codified. It really starts with an issue. And from that issue, I find a site, because what I haven't talked about yet in all of this is, in addition to being an aerial choreographer, I'm also a site artist, which means I make dances for unlikely places. So I combine the innovation that a place offers with the innovation that rigging can offer. So my work has many components to it, and that is the same as Joanna Hygood's work. And I've really taken the blessings that she has brought to me and expanded them in my own ways. But anyway, the site comes.
What are some of the examples of sites? Sorry to interrupt, but just to kind of like get a picture of it, what are some of the examples of sites that you've choreographed on or that you've used?
We've done a lot of work on the sides of buildings, and where that building is really matters. So we've done a lot of work in San Francisco's Tenderloin. We made an evening-length dance on the Cadillac Hotel, which is a single residency hotel, an SRO hotel that houses people just coming out of homelessness. So a lot of the people living in the hotel, they're single rooms. The bathrooms are down the hall. There's really no kitchen. You can have a hot plate, maybe a microwave if the wiring will allow it. And it's the next step up from being completely unhoused. So we made a dance on the Cadillac Hotel that was honoring 100 years of history in the Tenderloin neighborhood. And the Tenderloin is known for its outcast activism. So we highlighted the outcasts that have cycled through that neighborhood over 100 years, including, for example, women of color, trans women of color in the neighborhood who were responsible for really pushing the envelope for justice and being treated right for trans women of color in the Bay Area. And those women participated in the Tenderloin neighborhood in something called the Compton Cafeteria Riots, which predated the Stonewall riots by, I believe, about 10 years. I might have that number a little off. So we took that history, that outcast history where these women, these trans women, were really pushed out and, deeply harassed by the police, by businesses, and they pushed back. And now in the Tenderloin, there is a transgender corridor, and it's a historic, documented place, and it has a budget and it has programming. And so, my work was a part of acknowledging that history in the neighborhood. And we did that by dancing on the building, dancing on the balconies, and honoring the performative nature of what it takes to transform from a regular person to a queen. And we hired a beautiful and amazing performer named Honey Mahogany, and she really led us in a collaboration to make that happen on a balcony with.
I saw her on RuPaul's Drag Race this morning.
Say that again?
Yeah. She was on RuPaul's Drag Race, yeah?
Oh, yes, she was. Yes. She
yeah.
She also works in City Hall and is very political and has a very political job. And my hope is one day soon she'll run for mayor, and I'm pretty sure she would win. But anyway, so
Cool.
Honey's an example of someone that we collaborated with in the community to illuminate this history, which is a very political history. As you can imagine, the erasure of women of color from history, and especially trans women of color from history. So the question for me is, well, how do I use this site and the vocabularies that I know being off the ground to bring this illumination to the public? And so that's just one example.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was a really incredible project. I was very proud of it.
It sounds like, from doing a little bit of research on you, you were a political science major in college. Is that where your kind of social justice bent started?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it definitely started in high school. And I remember that because I was talking to a childhood friend last summer, and she was saying she's someone who lives in the suburbs and was a stay-at-home mom and raised a family of 5 kids and just had a very different life, has a very different life than mine. And so she was saying, well, tell me about your work. Like, what do you do? And I was explaining it to her, and she said, oh, yeah, you've always been political like that. And this is someone that knew me from second grade, and I hadn't really had that memory of myself. And when she said that, I'm like, you're right. That's actually true. I mean, I remember in 10th grade history, I had this beautiful teacher named Mrs. Cannaday, and she was the first African-American teacher I ever had. I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly white, and I remember just going to her office after school, and it was an American history class, because I wanted to know more. I wanted to know about the civil rights movement, and I wanted to know about the fight, and I wanted to know what was happening in the 60s and what was happening now, and that now was in the early 80s for me. So yeah, I think it's always been a part of my nature. I think being a Jewish person is an influence in how I look at the world, and how justice is just a part of my fabric, wanting justice.
You took all of this, you created your dance company, and I'm thinking about like the Tenderloin Project or with the weight room. Mm-hmm. How do these things start? Where do these seeds come from?
Well, the weight room, my answer is a little bit different, though everything I do, everything I create, I have some kind of personal connection to. Sometimes it's someone approaching me to say, I would really love to see this story brought to life. Sometimes it's me having a relationship with someone that creates an interest that's joined. And I say that because I made a dance about older homeless women. And that came about because I have a relationship with a journalist named Rose Aguilar, who wrote a story for The Nation. It was on the cover of The Nation magazine several years ago about older homeless women. And as I read it, and as I know Rose, it occurred to me that this could be illuminated, and it should be, because at that time, it was very rare for older homeless women to be homeless. This was at least 10 years ago, and now that's actually not as true. But anyway.
I'm sorry, it was very rare for older women to be homeless?
Yeah, because older women tended to be the keepers of the family and were somewhat protected from homelessness, because they were the ones that stayed at home with the parents or moved back in with the parents. I mean, just historically. And so Rose was naming a trend that was fairly new, that you had women on the streets who were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and many of them were still working and had no place to live. Wow. And she was writing this before there was a real explosion of understanding about income inequality and how it's affecting our cities, and especially my city. I think San Francisco is at the helm of the crisis of income inequality. So it was another reason why I really wanted to make this piece. But anyway, so that's that piece. The weight room is a very different story because I am a woman with an incarcerated loved one. My partner was in federal prison for many years and is currently out and on probation, which is a different kind of incarceration, but an incarceration nonetheless. And I connected for my own needs to an organization while all this was happening, or is happening, to an organization called Essie Justice Group, which supports women with incarcerated loved ones and operates on a healing to advocacy model. So not just supporting women, these poor women whose sons, fathers, brothers, husbands, are incarcerated, but knowing that, we as women with incarcerated loved ones are on the front lines of understanding the problem of mass incarceration and are therefore on the front lines of needing to change it. So for me, artistry is my tool. And so the weight room is actually the first in a trilogy of dances I'm making called the Decarceration Trilogy. And the tagline is dismantling the prison industrial complex one dance at a time. And so the weight room is the first in a series. The second is supposed to premiere in October, though with the COVID-19 virus, everything seems to be paused and we're not completely sure it's going to happen in the time schedule we've set up.
Did the Essie project then fund the beginnings of this? Or how do you get funding for these projects?
Actually, to me, being a good community partner means that I paid Essie supporting them and their infrastructure in order to support me and the artistic project, because they're not artists. And for me, constantly calling them, constantly engaging their staff time to support the art project, that costs money. So one of my commitments is to support my community partners financially where that makes sense. There are other times where I'm working with community partners whose budgets are far larger than mine. For example, the Asian Art Museum was a partner with the Tenderloin Project and the 100 Years of History in the Tenderloin Project. So in that case, they actually co-commissioned the piece. But I spend a lot of time fundraising. I have a really amazing part-time development director, Brecken Flournoy is her name, and we work really hard to mine every possible resource out there that supports artist as activist intention, that supports innovative new work in terms of form, because, the engineering and rigging experiments that we go through to get to where we end up are pretty formidable. So we spend a lot of energy and a lot of time fundraising through local, national, statewide fundraising opportunities through arts councils, and then through individual donors, and then through anyone who will listen to us.
And where do you practice these rigging experiments? Do you have sides of buildings that you kind of are your rehearsal halls?
It depends on the project. At best, a site project is developed 100% on site. That's not always possible. So we'll spend time in the studio. We have a studio that we rehearse at. It's called Studio 124. So far, they continue to have short-term residencies. They have really high ceilings. They have rigging capacity. And they have a cement floor. So the space is not really in high demand by other dancers. A lot of visual artists love the space. But aerialists really love the space. And it's a place where you can experiment, build something. I've worked with scene shops where we'll build something at the shop, test it out, figure out how it works, how it doesn't. That's what happened with the weight room and the set that we built for that. We call it the Tilt-A-Whirl. That was the name we finally came up with for the set. It was a mobile set that was self-sustaining in how it allowed a dancer to fly. So it needed no posting into the ground, into the ceiling, into anything. It was self-sustaining. It moved by dancers moving it. So it was a human effort to make it spin. And there was a winch that raised it up and down to set it up so that it could spin and tilt, and coin is the word that we use for how it would turn like a coin when you spin it and it's almost done spinning. It kind of goes around on its side.
Yeah, it's a really neat structure. I'll link to some pictures of it in the show notes so people can see it. But it's different because it seems like the site that you built for it can move.
Well, the weight room is a slightly exceptional project. After 23 years of making site work, I felt, having lived through it, that mass incarceration is such a national issue. So I really set my mind to developing a project that could tour. So it's an exceptional project in that way. And that's why we designed it to be self-sustaining. It was an extremely expensive set to build. I don't know that I'll ever get a budget like that again. It came about through the Rauschenberg's Artist as Activist Fellowship and also through NEFA, New England Foundation for the Arts, National Dance Project grants. So those two combined together to give me the budget that I needed to make it happen. So the weight room is designed to be performed in proximity to prison systems. So in San Francisco, we performed it right next to the federal building where Nancy Pelosi has her office, as do other politicians who have national impact. We also performed it in the Richmond district in partnership with the Richmond Center for the Performing Arts, but we performed it in the Iron Triangle, which is a neighborhood that has an extremely high rate of youth incarceration. And then we performed it right next to Sing Sing Prison. And that was a really amazing site. I think that was one of the most successful sites that we could have possibly come to. And that was a real gift to us.
What does that mean, a successful site?
Well, we were performing the piece literally right next to the prison wall. So you saw the guard tower, you saw the prison, and you saw the piece with the prison right behind you. So it wasn't abstracted to a theater where we had to invent barbed wire. You saw the real barbed wire. So the visceral experience for the audience was very holistic. You didn't have to imagine the prison, you were looking at the prison.
And does the audience come upon the structure, or do they buy tickets? Because in some site-specific work, I imagine, like, if you're hanging off the side of a building, your audience is the people who are around.
Everything is possible.
But with something like the weight room.
With the weight room, it was a little bit more of a cultivated audience. In the three sites that I just mentioned, it was a little bit more theater style that way. A lot of what we do, we have a happenstance audience or a walk-up audience because we are performing in public. The second piece in the trilogy, it's called Meet Us Quickly with Your Mercy, looking at Black and Jewish experiences of race and capture. That piece will, if all goes well in the world, be a piece where an audience will walk up because it's right on the street. So everything is possible. I don't like to limit myself. I do love a walk-up audience. I think it's really exciting when you start with, 500 people watching and you end with 1,000 people watching. That's a pretty exciting phenomenon. When we performed in New York, we performed as a guest of the Sing Sing Prison Museum, and they were instrumental in cultivating audiences of people who were both just interested in art and also impacted by mass incarceration. So we had a lot of people come. We had prison guards come. We had people who had family members who were on the inside. We had formerly incarcerated people, returning citizens come watch, and the Sing Sing Prison Museum did an amazing job with their outreach to make that happen.
We've talked a lot about kind of the logistical aspects of the company. Who is in your company? Who is the cast? How do you cast?
I cast
That was
dancers.
a lot of questions all at once.
Yes, but they are all leading the same place. I cast dancers. I don't cast people who don't have a really strong dance background. I've found over the years that it's easier to teach a dancer to be an aerialist than it is to teach an aerialist to be a dancer. And that might be a reflection of my own limitations as a teacher and as a director, but that's kind of where I've come from. Some of my dancers are self-trained in sight work, in aerial work. Some of them come to me and are just at the beginning of training off the ground. I have dancers that have stayed with me through multiple projects and life experiences. I have one dancer, Elena Stroud, who is still with me on and off, though she went off and danced with Cirque du Soleil for several years and came home and danced with me again, and then went off to have a child and, build her own life a bit. And now she's coming back with me as projects allow. So I have long-term relationships with artistic collaborators. One of the trainings that's really useful to me is someone who practices contact improvisation, because that's someone who's used to being off the ground, who's used to the unknowns, and who's used to safe, fast responding. And I think that's what it takes to be a good aerialist. I mean, when you're inventing on an object you've never been on before, you find yourself in really weird positions. Like just the other day in the studio, the other day before California went on lockdown, I was on this hoop and I was on the top of it. I'm like, I know I'm going to fall off this thing because I cannot figure out the weight equilibrium. And I indeed fell right off it. I knew it was coming, so it was a controlled fall. But so contact improvisation is a really good training for controlled falling. So that's just a little bit of who dances with me. I have a multiracial cast of dancers. It's really important to me as someone who practices as an intersectional feminist to be in relationship and coalition with dancers who are not just white and middle class, but who represent a breadth of American experience or immigrant experience. As I said, I've worked with trans women of color. That's been really satisfying. I hope to do more of that in the future. So that's a little bit about who. The other thing I'll say is that I have commissioned in 25 years, I've commissioned over 30 scores by women composers. And that's an intention and part of my mission as an artist. I feel like women are really underrepresented as composers. And so I've really tried to address that in composing almost, but not completely, all women composers.
And where do you source the composers?
Well, I'm in the Bay Area and we're a really cool place. So starting out, I just knew some.
So true. Yeah, okay.
We're a very cool place here. And then I've gotten references. And as I've gone on and on, people have come to me. People have suggested people to me. It's a multifaceted process. I'm always on the lookout. I'm always on the lookout for composers. I'm always on the lookout for dancers who are interested in working with me. I'm always on the lookout for stage man. I'm always on the lookout for everything. We live in a very insecure field, at least at my level. I'm not the Paris Opera. I don't have an unlimited annual budget. And so it's not easy to find people who are willing to work at levels that don't allow them to really make a living. And the Bay Area has one of the highest costs of living in the country. So that's another obstacle that I have to negotiate all the time.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting kind of place you're in, literally and figuratively, I think. Because in the Bay Area, my understanding is that there does have to be some privilege in order to be an artist, just to fund your life or just to exist.
I would say that's true. I think there's privilege. There's also incredible ingenuity in how to create a balance. One of my dancers teaches full-time at a high school, and then she also teaches at Mills College at times, and she maneuvers herself to be in as much as she can. I don't think Bay Area dancers are that unique. They're doing the same thing that dancers in New York do, which is teaching Pilates, spreading themselves between several dance companies. I have a dancer who has worked with me as an amazing collaborator for several years, who also works with Axis Dance Company. So it's a wonderful sharing. It's also difficult because we fight for her time. Again, not a problem unique to me. Many dancers dance for more than one company. So, they have to figure out the scheduling and the time sharing, and everybody has to be generous at times. So there is a privilege, but there is also an incredible commitment. I wouldn't say my dancers have trust funds and rich partners. I don't think that's who is attracted to the work I do. Everybody works. It's just that they're pretty ingenious in figuring it all out, as I have been for many years, balancing your arts administration with your teaching, with your creative time. That's kind of been my particular method.
And have you found any good ways to do that? Asking for the audience and for myself.
I think one thing that has helped me over time is to do less and do it well. So to sacrifice doing everything all the time, or doing many things a lot of time, and doing less and just putting everything into that. That's also, coming from someone who's now in my 50s, and where it's easier to slow down a little bit. If you had told me that in my 30s, I might have said, no, I'm not going to accept that. There's something about aging that allows you to accept a slightly slower pace. Though I have to say, one of my best role models is Margie Jenkins, and she's 79 and she's still going strong. She's a choreographer of kind of one of the founders of Bay Area Dance, with Anna Halprin, and the founder of Dimensions Dance Company, and Alleluia Panis is also one of the founders of Bay Area Dance. So, that's the lesson that I've learned. Do less and do it deeply.
Do less, do it deeply. Mm-hmm. I like that. As an energetic 30-year-old, I'll try to internalize that, but it may not be that easy.
I mean, I think the other thing is to find your own pace and your own path and not be swayed by what someone else is doing or not doing. Like what's your balance? Because we don't go through law school or medical school where there's a template. First you do this, and then you get the residency, and then you have the this, and then you have the law apprenticeship or whatever it's called, and then you get the partnership. We don't have any of that. So we're not beholden to any particular pathway. So really pay attention to what works for you. I think that's the other thing that makes it work.
Kind of going back to like a traditional circus model or art, dance is less like this, I find. Some forms of dance maybe, but I'm thinking is art as entertainment versus art as social justice.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like art as entertainment has a very clear evidence of success, right? It's money or notoriety.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, kind of going back to that question, you said a site was successful, and I said, what made it successful?
Mm-hmm.
How do you gauge, or can you gauge, your impact as an artist who's working in a social justice realm?
Well, that really is the $1 million question. And it's something that I'm asked often. I mean, I can point to certain successes we've had. We did a piece about women who built the Bay Area's bridges. And so we did an oral history project. We collected, I believe, 7 oral histories of women who worked as pile drivers or laborers or carpenters. And we collected their oral histories. And from those stories, we created a dance. And we used their voices in the sound score. Pamela Z was the composer for that project. She was also the composer on The Weight Room. And one of the successes, there were a few successes of that project. We unearthed the depth of sexism, sometimes life-threatening sexism that happened on the workplace. We created an archive of Black working-class women that is now housed at LARC, the Labor Archives and Research Center of San Francisco State. It was the first archive that they managed to get their hands on of Black working-class women. And so that was a really big deal.
Wow. Yeah.
We also got men in the unions, higher up in the unions, to come see the project who did not know how bad it was for women. And so we educated them. And those are just 3 tangible things that I can name from one particular project that happened in 2006. And I remember that because my son was 2 years old and he was in the audience and he behaved badly and he got taken out. That's how I remember the date of that project.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you remind him of that to this day.
Sometimes. But there's a bigger thing. I had this experience in my workshop this semester where I teach a lot about partnership with an object, to initiate a relationship with the object as a partner. And one of my students after class, because we always do a verbal, check-in afterwards, she said, no one has ever asked me. And she was someone who had some circus training. She was probably in her early 20s. And she said, no one has ever asked me that, to partner with an object. And I feel like that takes me as a woman out of being objectified by the idea of performing with the object, which I think, and this might get me in a lot of trouble, but I think that happens a lot in art as entertainment for women. I think that objectification sells, and I try really hard not to fall into that trope, and that alone is social justice.
I mean, if that gets you in a lot of trouble, like I'm happy to get in trouble right there with you, because I think I think you hit the nail on the head. And that's such an interesting way to think about it, actually, is to think about like actual object versus person as object.
And I think there's amazing circus artists. I think of Elsie and Serenity in Vermont running their school, and I have a former student and friend, Kate, who works in Portland right now, who don't buy into that trope. But I think it's harder in the circus world not to. I think there's more permission in the dance world to radically depart from a kind of anti-feminist objectification. I also think that a lot of contemporary circus leads with those questions. So I don't mean to say that all circus objectifies, because I think there's, a growing consciousness. There's queer circus, there's trans circus. There's a lot going on that, supports a change, but I still do see, even in what people choose to wear. I get calls every year by the sort of the go-between companies that get hired by a corporation to set up the entertainment, and they always want to know what we're going to wear. And I said, if you need us to wear skimpy little things, then you've got the wrong company. If you want something that's spectacular and innovative that someone probably hasn't seen before, then let's stick with this conversation. But if you're looking for that, girly thing, that's not me. So, yeah.
Work. Well, I mean, I think what you're doing is so important, and boom. I don't know what else to say except for that sounds great. And your funding, again, does come from, it sounds like you take a lot of time to write grants and apply for foundational funding.
Well, I'd say I've taken a lot of time to think and develop the company strategically. We have a strategic plan. We sort of work in multiple directions. We have a youth program that centers girls who have not really had much opportunity for dance training or aerial training. So we focus on low-income girls. We focus on girls coming out of and are in public schools where the educational standard is maybe not as high as we would all like it to be. So, we have funding that supports our youth programming. We have funding that supports public art. The Bay Area can be a pretty generous place for artists who have a long-term track record. I mean, it's a catch-22 because you have to build that track record. I didn't have any major institutional support till I'd been going for about 10 years. I think that's something that people that look at me now might not realize, that it took 10 years of pretty much no funding to attract, even a phone call from a major funder. It took me 10 years to get an NEA grant. I applied 10 years in a row before I got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So, again, it's that thing I was talking about, how the dancers make it. There's a diligence and a discipline and a constancy, and I get a million rejections in every direction, and just work really hard to not let them stop me from doing what I want to do.
That's awesome. I'm glad they haven't, because I think, again, your work is super important.
I think the coronavirus might get me, but we'll see.
No, it can't. I won't allow it. It can't get any of us. It's just, I saw this picture, what was it, the other day, of something, and it was on the internet, and it was this joke where this person, it was like regular people, and they were all freaking out about their lives, and then it was artists, and they're looking there going, oh, it's your first time?
Right.
Because I feel like...
That's a really good point. Well, I heard Robert Reich speak last night. He is an economist. He teaches at UC Berkeley, and he was in the Clinton administration. He ran the Labor Department nationally, and he was very clear. He said, our economy is not crashing. We are pausing the economy to prioritize public health. And that gave me some hope. Like, yes, we are on pause. We are not on end. But when you're in the middle of it, it's hard not to feel like, oh my God, it's all over. So, yeah. But you're right. I mean, how many times have we been sent back to zero as artists? So many times. Yeah.
It's 7:14. Well, for you, it's 4:14.
Yep.
So I want to be respectful of your time. I do have one last question for you, which I ask all of my guests.
Okay.
Which is, what advice would you give yourself at the beginning of your career?
Oh, wow. I think as a young dancer, I felt really I'll start this by saying that I started dancing when I was 20, so that was late. And I felt intimidated by people who had so much more confidence than I did in performance, in being on stage, in making for the stage, in making dance, and in choreographing. And I think I would tell myself, to let myself off the hook a little bit, to let myself learn in my own pace. Because that's all you have. In this field, you're not you're rarely winning big awards and, you're not becoming Tom Hanks or, you're not getting celebrity by being a, experimental dance artist. You're getting what you put in. And at the very beginning, I remember I was interviewed very, very, very long time ago. And someone said, well, what's your goal? What's your big goal? And I said, my big goal is to build a body of work. And she said, but what's your real big goal? And I said, no, that's my big goal. And I think that was a really good goal. And I stick
I think that's a great
to
goal.
that. That's still my goal. I want to keep building work. I want to be effective. And so, yes, I would say to my young self, I'd say one thing that I'm not very good at is keeping up my technology tools, keeping up with all the new generations of technology tools. So I would go back to my young self and say, make more time for that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you mean by tech? You mean like computers and smartphones and stuff?
Yeah, all the ways you can use the computer to document, support, share, all the ways that you can use Google Docs and YouTube and Instagram. And I'm just not very up on a lot of that stuff because I didn't choose to keep up with it. I was very up on everything from my generation. And then, every generation, the world's technology changes. And so I wish that I was more open than I am to being excited about keeping up with the tools. I kind of do the bare minimum that I can get away with.
Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I feel like it changes every year, and I barely like keeping up with it. So.
It's true. It is exponential now. It does change every year. Yes.
It's nuts. Yeah. Well, Jo, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Thank you, Shannon.
I'm so glad I got to catch you.
Okay.
I'm sorry it wasn't in person.
That's okay.
Everything got canceled.
Everything,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
And are you in Canada or New York?
I live in Montreal now.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. I have to go do a 10-minute ab workout with my teenager.
Oh my God, do it.
Yeah.
Also, if you ever happen to need another workout, Jade Fonda, all of her like old school workout videos are on YouTube.
So funny. God, that's
and that's what I've been doing. And they're incredible.
My God. Well, we found this one, so I'm going to try it out. But that's great to know. Those were really hard.
They are.
May I look like her when I'm 80.
Amen.
Okay, thanks, Shannon.
Take care, Jo. Bye. That was my interview with Jo Kreiter. If you want to learn more about Jo Kreiter, Flyaway Productions, the Essie Justice Group, and so much more about her work, there's a ton of links, of articles, of information online. I've posted a bunch of ones that I think are super relevant and will give you a really good idea of her work in the show notes. If you want to find them, they're just underneath this. They're also at www.theartistathlete.com. Click on the little tab that says podcasts, and it'll be right up there. It was particularly important for me to have Jo on the podcast in light of recent events. I'd had her scheduled before, but I think it's hard in times like this to remember why art is necessary when it seems like there's so many other obvious necessities. And I think that was at the root of this question that I asked her about art as entertainment versus art as social justice, and how you kind of can measure or see the outcomes of someone creating a reflection of humanity for the purpose of having us all celebrate or understand our own humanity and that of other people. And what Jo does and what she talked about again and again in this interview and in her work is about representation and telling stories, art that has a purpose and a point. Even in the midst of a pandemic where we can't gather and watch spectacle, we still have stories that need to be told. And when this is all over and we can come out of our homes, we'll need artists like Jo and you and me to tell those stories. If you want to learn more about Jo Kreiter's company, Flyaway Productions, you can go to flyawayproductions.com. They have plenty of information, a gallery of photos of all of their work, a place where you can donate to their cause, and to contact the company. As for me, as always, to find me on Instagram for aerial training tips and inspiration, I'm at _artist_athlete. My website is theartistathlete.com. I'm on Facebook, The Artist Athlete. And if you love what you're listening to, I promise it will come at you every single week, whether you're inside, outside, with 1,000 people, or just sitting by yourself. You can go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk at you next week, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and rope by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello, all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.